How is it with your soul? In John Wesley's Methodist structure, each person in the class rendered a personal report in answer to that question. At every weekly class meeting, I ask you now to take a moment and breathe and take inventory of where your spirit is right now. What attitude are you bringing to worship today? What do you expect to acquire today? What will you discover about yourself today? Let us begin with your taking the time to quietly examine how it is with your soul. Because what I'm about to say may be difficult for you to hear. Joseph's story is all about sibling rivalry. Our Genesis reading, as well as the last portion of Psalm 105, refer to the story of Joseph and his rise to fulfill his destiny in the service of God. The story of Joseph, son of Jacob, renamed Israel, is well known. This episode of Joseph's story gives us a picture of how a jealous relationship with his brothers is a perfect example of the nature and consequence of sibling rivalry. If you can recall, Joseph's father, Jacob, and his brother Esau's rivalry over birthright, it loomed over the brothers for decades. And even before these brothers, Genesis tells a tale of jealous rage and murder between two brothers. That's right, Cain and Abel. Joseph was obviously the favorite. Close talks to dad and that coat. Seeing that coat obviously made the brothers livid. They could barely contain themselves as Joseph strutted among them wearing that coat. They worked dawn to dusk, herding these sheep pasture through pasture, and what was Joseph's assignment? Help the wives. No hard labor like they were burdened with. And Father, at this particular time, sent Joseph to check up on them. No doubt to render a report back to Father. Joseph followed them and caught up with them at the end of this grueling trip through Shechem and found them in Dothan. Can you picture the scene? Surely the campfire chat every night along the trip included heated outrage over the younger brother's dreams of the day. The day, his being their Lord. How could this outrage not grow into plotting ways to dispose of the Joseph problem? And now they see him approaching, that precious coat waving like a declaration of war as Joseph came into sight. This circumstance presented the perfect opportunity to kill the dreamer. But Reuben could not allow his sibling to murder their brother. He could, however, assist in a plot to get him out of the way for a while. Yet, he could not see himself as the one dissenting vote. So, as was the custom of this family, their use to deceit, he suggested that they throw the boy into the cistern and leave him there rather than directly murder him. His secret plan was to come back into the wilderness at a later time and rescue Joseph. No blood on his hands. And so, when unsuspecting Joseph arrived, they stripped him of that cursed coat and pushed him into the pit with satisfying thoughts of his being devoured by animals or starving to death. Quite unexpectedly, a caravan of Ishmaelites drew near, and Judah, no doubt the money manager among them, sprung an idea. Sell their brother to the caravan of traders and keep the prophet. an even better idea. And so they left Joseph to be sold as a slave in Egypt. Oh, if they had only known what God had in store for them, that their younger brother would become not just their Lord, but their Lord and Savior in their most desperate time of need. What is your experience with sibling rivalry? Was there an issue with it in your home? Most people look at the power struggle among siblings as an inevitable rite of passage, certainly not with damage to this degree, but there is no doubt that sibling rivalry causes damage. How sad it is to think that our society expects people connected by blood to bully and oppress each other. Yes, I said bullying and oppression in the family. Let's call it what it is. Of the characters in our Joseph story, to whom do you most relate? Joseph, the victim. He is depicted as a naive, innocent, maybe even bumbling fool who can't get out of his own way. Reuben would be rescuer, a man with conscience, but as an eldest brother, he should have had the courage to take charge of this outrageous situation and follow his conscience. Or might we relate to Judah, a slickster, looking for a quick buck, showing little remorse for how he gets it? Or maybe one of the complaining brothers, so caught up in the mob mentality that he was willing to execute a murder. 11 sons, multiple wives. Can you imagine the turmoil in that household? If only the brothers could have seen their future. If only one of them could have walked in Joseph's shoes for a while. Do you suppose their behavior might have been more reasonable? Their opinion more accepting? Their feelings more affectionate? Where was the love? All of our Christian education has taught us that once we accept Christ, we graduate from one of God's creations to one of his children. Our Romans epistle reminds us that in God's eyes, we are all the same. We are his children, one family. We were made in his image and purpose on this earth to live in such a way that our very being gives glory to him. Jesus gave up his perfect life so that we could maintain our status as family members. How much do we show that we appreciate that fact? Do we carry such an attitude out in our everyday lives? What do you see when you look at me? Describe me in your mind. Most of you have known me for well over a decade and see me as a member of your church family. But if you did not list black woman in your description, you are shortchanging who I am. I know that some of you who acknowledge my skin color followed it with a thought like, well, I don't see color, or, but I was raised to be colorblind. If you care for me, I challenge you to never acknowledge those two thoughts again. I challenge you to see me as your sister in a Joseph coat. There is a lesson in the Joseph story that can, if you let it, give you insight into the current worldwide strive for justice. So look at me and endeavor to hear the real story of the life of people of color as we relate to white folk. Not what you think it to be, or want it to be, or assume it is. minute to walk in my shoes and look for ways that my life intersects yours. First of all, know that I am fully aware that I am a person of privilege. And no matter the circumstances that brought you to your life as it is today, my white brothers and sisters, so are you. I am conscious of that every day, but you probably are not. You do not have to be. You own this world, I'm just living in it. Like many, probably most of you, I came from a very meager background, poor, partially rural, right here in Northeast Dutchess County in Columbia. Generally humble means just like you. Just like you, my childhood experiences were peppered with angst. But unlike you, I could never be secure knowing that there would be a way forward for me, no matter how hard I tried. You, because you are white, could dream of the good life and feel assured that if you worked hard enough, things would go your way. That in nearly any circumstance, you could find a place to fit in. That if you wanted to be a person highly visible or a person hiding in obscurity, you could. Your choice. But my life was always unsettled. I was burdened with an overhanging and ever-present knowledge that most folks see me as lesser. I know you're saying, not me. I'm not like that. And I know each of you as a good, moral person, not prone to prejudice. But I know and have experienced a kind of unconscious bias that permeates much of this community, indeed the nation. And with great effort, I have learned to navigate around it. Your privilege allows you to not even be conscious of its presence. I have learned to navigate your world by being more than what is expected. My grandmother and my mother were valedictorian and salutatorian of their high school classes. Yet there was never an expectation of their going to college. In the world of my parents and grandparents, that just was not the path for Black folk. I am a woman of privilege. I am not only a college graduate, but a member of a noble profession with multiple credentials and awards. I would like to think that I achieved this on my own as an American dream, rather assumption, but I did not. Yes, hard work, but not alone. Although I had an outstanding average in high school, it took another person of color, Mr. Bertoman, and some of you who went to Weebatuck can remember this man, to do the work of getting me to believe that college was even possible. No white person I know has been without a dream to do better, to better their circumstance, to be a better person. My grandparents were from Virginia. My grandfather's ancestral home was in Rapidan. Yearly, we would take a trip south to visit relatives. I would sleep on the floor of the old Studebaker for most of the trip. But one thing that was sure to occur along the way was a stop for gas. I would be hassled awake, not to go to the restroom, but for my grandfather to point out the white-only signs. We always took our meals with us so that we did not have to guess where we would be allowed to pick up a snack. And we always carried a pee-pee jar, so there was no issue when we had to relieve ourselves. Did you ever have to walk in these shoes? Originally, Greg and I were Baptists. We became Methodists after much study through my grandmother's encouragement, and finally, we chose. I have found myself to be a studier. I came to Methodism after becoming familiar with two basic books. No, not the Bible. I was already Christian, and as I said, I'm a studier. But the book of resolution, and more importantly, the book of social principles. Portions of those books were taught to me by our first Methodist pastor, Ted Aurelius. Those books and the democratic nature of the denomination convinced me that Methodism was for me. What brought you to Methodism? I venture to guess that most of you are longtime Methodists who were brought up in the church. You were never challenged, maybe until now, to think about why you are a Methodist. I have always been socially aware and dare to say an activist, or at least an ally. And indeed, that is what John Wesley has called us to be. He demands that we take the responsibility of rooting out injustice and, in the example of Jesus, serving our brothers in need. Right up my alley. But I sense that your history has made you passive in the quest for social justice. I hope you can prove me wrong. Because John Wesley has called us to be personally, politically, and symbolically active. So let's talk about brotherhood and how I see the Joseph story as a reflection of the social justice movement that is shaking our foundations today. We speak of brotherhood as an ideal at the soul of our country. We embrace the idea that each of us is endowed with certain inalienable rights. We assume that all men are equal. We feel assured that if a rugged individual works hard enough, he can rise to the top. We all strive for a comfortable, fulfilling life, that such a life is possible for everyone in this country. But I tell you, that easy life is not possible for some of us. Not because we are who we are, but because of what we look like, how we sound, our disabilities, and even whom we love. Let's say you identify with Joseph in his story. He was no doubt an outsider among the brothers. You would admit that if you were he, you would have seen yourself as reckless and with the privilege bestowed on you, trusting and unconscious to what was truly going on within his own family. How could he have not seen this coming? This family was a family whose habit of deceitful practice was made it common practice to hide their intent to change the assumed script. When it was to this country's benefit, public principle welcomed people from all other countries to its shores. Bring me your weary, your tired, your poor. This is written at the base of the Statue of Liberty. Wide swaths of diversity helped us prosper, and studies tell us this to be true today. But some do not feel so welcome today. Our ancestors even kidnapped a naive group of people, immigrants from the African continent, my people, to found the economics of this nation. They declared these people to be lesser based on skin color, and established a system where white skin is a standard that brings success. The dominant elite established scientific evidence that proved white superiority. Of course, we know that today's real scientific evidence, I'm a studier, that all human DNA is 99.9% identical, and the difference in appearance is due to ancestral adaptation to environment. To me, I believe that God put that fraction of a difference in us because he loves variety. Leave it to us to make an issue, a pillar of public policy. Look at the rest of his creations. We are brothers and sisters, and it was we who created the strife caused by sibling rivalry. If you look at it closely, it's a perspective of superiority, not a horrible, extreme reflection of sibling rivalry. Do you not, in some way, identify with Judah? Our general behavior suggests we do. We're eager to make a profit, to take an opportunity to better our circumstances. But most of us draw the line when it comes to the expense of others. If only that were universally true. Now back to the Joseph saga. It was the rest of the collective that conspired to draw up the murder plot and hide the evidence of foul play. We like to think that we would have stood up and called the scheme just fancy. Stop the thing at the imagination level. But when it came down to it, we too acquiesced to the will of the crowd, the loudest voice, the dominant culture, to those in power. We unfortunately forget that it's we who put them in power. Those of us who embody the power to work for the public good, though we may object to obviously unjust behavior, usually assume an attitude of, well, I just want to be comfortable with my stuff where I am. We want to live in a predictable world where change is somewhat under our control. It's kind of upside down, isn't it? So we do not address conflict that we do not perceive as at our doorstep. And we certainly will not run the risk of flipping the table in front of those seen as more powerful than ourselves. So we watch and shake our heads. We voice our opinions only to those who agree with us. No risk. We see this turmoil nonsense as short-lived, and we will wait it out. We have gone through public outcries before, and they have resolved themselves without my involvement. But I am afraid that there is no waiting for what is happening this time. The ugly division and systematic racism is put in front of our face on a daily rhythm. Justice cries out to all of us to not simply put a Band-Aid on this wound, so we do not have to see it as it heals on its own. It will leave you another scar on the face of humanity. If you truly believe in social justice, wake up and involve yourself. First, educate yourself about the true nature of the history of our whole nation, not just through the lens of the historically privileged. Well, what to do? Begin with prayer for insight and divine direction. Read a book that was not written by a white male. Then find a place to begin conversation with wise, knowledgeable, and experienced people about those questions that are too hard to yield insight on your own. Classism, sexism, systematic racism, gender identity, ableism. Then go back to your family, neighbors, and friends, and share what you have learned. Our young people have turned over a rock and have looked down the cistern to see what we have done to Joseph. And they are asking us what we're going to do about the injustice we let fester from denial, a passive posture, and neglect. They are asking us the privileged to become allies, activists, and accomplices, as Jesus was for the rights of the least of us. They are asked to force ourselves, they're asking us to force ourselves into those conversations that we have avoided because they are uncomfortable. Psalm often pushes us, as it pushes the Hebrew people to look back on their history at the times when God was obviously in their midst, so that they learn to be secure about his promise to always be with them. God, my brothers and sisters, is the author of our future, but we are responsible for how we live our lives today. The Hebrews created over 600 rules to assure that they live a godly life. Jesus boiled our responsibility down to two: love God and love your neighbor. With that command in mind, dare to embrace discomfort. I think we can walk in each other's shoes, and though I think you could never walk in my skin, we can talk. We can muse about the future God has in store for us, but like Peter, we need to step out of the boat to a place of discomfort. Your story and my story are the only tools we have to create a genuine relationship. It is only through relationship that empathy is created. Empathy is a tool that has the power to dismantle the barriers that lock us in. It is empathy that has the potential to grow into genuine brotherly love. Love big enough to get us out of the boat. So, how is your heart? I do not think you could ever walk in my skin, but you could walk in my shoes if you have the courage. Let's talk.